take flight in the dark on the light.
Hello and welcome back to Deathly Curious Australia, where haunted history meets deadly truth. I've been thinking, people love to roll their eyes at ghost tours. You know the tone, oh, it's a gimmick, it's just a spooky cash grab, or it's just people wandering around an old building in the dark, hoping a ghost will throw a spoon at them. And look, sometimes haunted tourism absolutely leans into that drama. It's part of the fun. I'm not pretending otherwise. But I also think people underestimate what these tours can actually do. Because when haunted tourism is done well, and I mean done well with respect for the site and the history attached to it, it can do something really valuable. It can get people through the door of places they might never have cared about otherwise. It can keep old buildings in public conversation. It can make people curious about history they probably weren't planning to look up on their own. And in some cases, it can help keep those places alive. Not because everyone suddenly becomes a heritage expert after spending 2 hours in an old jail with a torch and a spirit box, but because once people are inside those places, the history stops feeling distant. It becomes real. So that's what I want to talk about, in not whether every old building is haunted, not whether every ghost story is true, and definitely not whether Annabelle should be allowed anywhere near a moving truck. I want to talk about haunted tourism in Australia and why I actually think ghost tours, paranormal nights and after dark history experiences can be a really positive thing for our historic places when they're handled properly. Because sometimes the ghost story is what gets people through the gate, and once they're inside, history gets its chance. I think haunted tourism gets dismissed far too easily. It gets shoved into this weird little box where people treat it like it's all cheap jump scares, dramatic music and somebody whispering, "Did you hear that?" every 6 seconds. And yes, sometimes it's a little theatrical. Sometimes it's people making deeply questionable decisions in the name of curiosity, walking into a former asylum at 11 p.m. with one torch, a K2 meter, and the confidence of someone who has absolutely not thought this through. But that doesn't automatically make it shallow, because old buildings don't stay relevant just because they're old. That would be lovely. It would make life much easier. Unfortunately, this building is historically important isn't always enough to make people show up in huge numbers. People are busy. They've got a million things competing for their attention. And not everyone is going to wake up on a Saturday and think, you know what I'd love to do? Go read interpretive signage in a former quarantine station. But tell them there's a ghost tour. Tell them there are stories attached to the place. Tell them people have heard footsteps there, seen shadow figures, felt something. Tell them there's a room nobody likes being left alone in. Suddenly they're interested. And honestly, good. Because if that's what gets somebody to step inside an old homestead, a former jail, an asylum, a quarantine station, a tunnel, or any place they otherwise would never have bothered with, then that matters. That's not nothing. Because once they're in there, they're not just walking into a ghost story. They're walking into a real place with a real history. And that's where haunted tourism can do something much more interesting than people give it credit for. I think this is the bit people miss. That paranormal can be the hook without being the whole story. Sometimes it's just the invitation. It's the thing that makes somebody book the tour. It's the thing that makes an old building feel immediate instead of dusty and distant and easy to ignore. It's the thing that turns that old place over there into, actually, I really want to go there and see how it feels for myself. And once someone does that, once they're standing inside one of these places at night, hearing the stories, seeing the old walls in low light, listening differently because the whole atmosphere has shifted, the history lands differently. It just does. You notice things you wouldn't in daylight. The scale of a corridor, the coldness of a room, the way silence sits in a building that once held so many people, the way some places feel heavy, whether you believe in hauntings or not, and that can make people pay attention to the history in a much deeper way. They stop thinking of it as some distant event on a timeline and start thinking about the people who were actually there. Who quarantined there? Who was locked up here? Who worked here? Who was hidden away there? What happened in this room before it became part of a ghost tour? That's the bit I find really interesting, because sometimes the paranormal doesn't replace the history at all. Sometimes it's the thing that finally makes people feel it. There's also a very practical side to this that gets ignored because it's not as dramatic as saying a shadow figure followed you down a hallway. Historic places cost money, a lot of money. They need maintenance, they need repairs, they need insurance, they need staffing, restoration, upkeep, event planning, and people willing to keep the place open and functioning. And if they're open to the public, they need visitors, not once, but consistently. That's where haunted tourism can become really important, because a ghost tour doesn't just create a spooky night out. It creates another reason for a site to be active, another reason for people to book, another stream of income, another way to reach visitors who might never think of themselves as history buffs in the first place. And I actually think that matters a lot. If a haunted tour helps a site stay open later, run more events, attract new audiences, keep people talking, and bring in money that supports the venue, then that's a good thing, full stop. That doesn't make the paranormal side fake or frivolous. It means the paranormal side might be helping support the very real future of a historic place. And honestly, if an old building survives partly because people are willing to wander through it at 10 p.m. with a torch in a terrible sense of self-preservation, I'm okay with that. Because the alternative for some places isn't a lovely, respectful daytime heritage crowd magically appears. Sometimes the alternative is less visibility, less money, less engagement, and eventually a place becoming much easier to neglect. So no, I don't think haunted tourism should be brushed off as silly. Not when it can keep a place in the public eye and make sure people still care enough to visit it. And this is the part I think matters just as much. Historic places don't just hold facts. They hold memory. They hold local stories, family stories, weird little details that never made it onto an official plaque, and the kind of stories that get passed around for decades because someone's aunt swore she saw a woman in white on the stairs and nobody in the family has been normal about that room ever since. That stuff matters too, because history isn't just dates and ownership records and architecture. It's also the emotional side of a place. It's the way a building sits in local memory, the stories people still tell about it, the feelings attached to it, the way some places never quite leave a town's imagination even after their original purpose is long gone. And haunted tourism can keep that layer alive. Not just what happened here, but how this place has been remembered. Not just the official version, but the folklore, the witness accounts, the strange moments, the stories that grew around a place because people kept feeling like it still had something to say. That doesn't mean every story is true in a literal sense, but it does mean the stories themselves become part of the site's living identity. And I think that's worth preserving too. This isn't just a nice theory. You can actually see it happening. Take Q Station. If there's ever a place where history and atmosphere are impossible to separate, it's that one. You've got this beautiful harbour setting, and underneath all of that beauty is a history built around quarantine, illness, migration, separation, fear and death. People go there for the ghost tours. Of course they do. They go because they've heard the stories. They want to walk the grounds after dark, hear about the people who passed through there, and experience the place in a completely different way. But if the tour is doing its job properly, people don't walk away thinking about whether something brushed past their leg in the shower block. They walk away thinking about what that site actually was, what quarantine meant, what isolation meant, what it must have felt like to arrive there sick or suspected of being sick, cut off from the life you thought you were heading into. That's not small. That's a ghost tour leading somebody straight into a much bigger story. Then there's old Parramatta Gaol. A place like that doesn't need anyone to fake atmosphere for it. It already has it. You can feel the history in those kinds of places because they were built around control, punishment, confinement, routine, fear, all of it. And yes, people are drawn in by the haunted side. But if they're walking those corridors at night, hearing the stories, seeing the cells, imagining what it would have been like to live inside that system, they're not just consuming a spooky experience. They're engaging with the emotional reality of the place. A good haunted tour doesn't erase that. It can actually sharpen it. It can make the history feel less like a chapter heading and more like something lived. Monte Cristo Homestead, that's another obvious one. Its haunted reputation is part of what made it such a fixture in Australia's paranormal imagination. People know the name because of the stories attached to it, the tragedies, the legends, the feeling that the house itself never really settled. And whether somebody believes every story told about Monte Cristo or not, there's no denying that the haunted identity of that place kept it in public conversation. It kept people curious, it kept them visiting, it kept the house in the national imagination the way a lot of heritage buildings never manage. And again, it matters because once a site drops out of public imagination completely, it becomes much easier for it to fade. Then there's Picton, which I think is such a good example because it's not just one building with one neat story attached to it. It's a place where the paranormal reputation has become part of the wider identity of the area. You've got the tunnel, the stories, the witness accounts, the folklore, the way people keep returning because they feel there's something still there to understand. And whether someone goes to Picton because they're interested in hauntings, local history, urban legends, or they just enjoy making slightly reckless choices in old tunnels, they're still going there. They're still talking about it. They're still keeping the place in conversation, and that matters. And then there's Aradale, which I think is one of the most important examples in this whole conversation because it's where everything gets complicated in a good way. Aradale isn't just a haunted location. It's a site tied to mental health history, institutionalisation, outdated treatment systems, isolation, stigma, and a lot of real suffering. So for me, Aradale is exactly the kind of place that shows why respectful haunted tourism matters so much. Because no, a place like that should never be reduced to just a scary old asylum people visit for a thrill and then leave without thinking anything deeper about. But I also think there's a reason people are drawn to places like Aradale through paranormal tours and after dark experiences. It creates atmosphere, yes, it absolutely does, but it also creates proximity. It makes people ask harder questions. Who was here? What did the life inside this place actually look like? How were people treated here? What does it say about us that places like this still sit so heavily in public memory? And if a haunted tour can get somebody to ask those questions, really ask them, then I think it can absolutely be part of preserving the significance of the site rather than diminishing it. Now, all of that said, I do think the way haunted tourism is done matters enormously, because there's a difference between using atmosphere to invite curiosity and using trauma as a cheap prop. And I think most people listening know exactly what I mean. The good haunted tour doesn't flatten a place into one spooky anecdote and call it a night. It doesn't forget the people at the centre of the story. It doesn't treat every difficult site like a content backdrop. It doesn't act like the history is just the boring bit you rush through on the way to the ghost stories. The best haunted tourism, the kind I'll always support, keeps the history at the centre of it. It understands that folklore and paranormal experiences can sit alongside real history without replacing it. It gives people context, it respects the site, it respects the people connected to it, and it leaves visitors with more than, well, that was creepy. It leaves them thinking about the place itself. That's the difference. That's where haunted tourism stops being novelty and starts becoming something truly valuable. I think what fascinates me about all of this is that people are still looking for connection in these places. Not just fear, a thrill, but connection to the past, connection to stories that feel unfinished, a connection to buildings that still seem to hold emotion in their walls. And if haunted tourism can create that, if it can bring people into old places, help support their future, keep their stories alive, and make people care about their history in a deeper way, then I think it's worth taking seriously. Not as a gimmick, not as an excuse to sensationalize difficult histories, but as one of the ways historic places keep breathing in the public imagination, because ghost stories don't have to compete with history. Sometimes they're the reason people finally stop and listen to it. So maybe the question isn't whether haunted tourism belongs in historic places. Maybe the better question is what we do with that attention once people are there. If the ghost story is what gets them through the door, are we using that moment well? Are we giving them a thrill and nothing else? Or are we giving them something bigger than that? Context, history, memory, and a reason to care about the place long after they leave. Because when haunted tourism is done with respect, I really do think it can help keep history alive, not by replacing the truth of a place, but by making people curious enough to go looking for it. I'm Monique. This has been Deathly Curious. Until next time, stay curious, because some stories refuse to stay buried. Bye.
In the dark, on the light, eyes locked, you can feel. On the thrill is